Oh, she's got a ticket to... Right, not a ticket to Canada. Oh, well, A Ticket to Canada is our book today. And it's about some African Americans heading up to Canada as well as loyalists. So we're going to learn about that today. And I think that's really cool to do that during African American History Month, which is February. We've already done James Fortin right before February. And I think we'll add some videos, and we're going to do a lot on civil rights and even more on slavery all throughout the year. So we'll be learning plenty of African American history, which is great. I mean, that's what we should do. The reason why it was put as an African American History Month, or used to be called Black History Month, is because people used to ignore it. They didn't teach it. They only taught George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and all that. And it's good to learn those people. Those are heroes of mine. But we need to learn all the history. And so we'll learn about the Loyalists and African Americans, slaves and free, and Ticket to Canada. They're going to head up there. All right? So let's begin, shall we?
Recording Ticket to Canada by Eric Oatman. Illustrated by John Martin.
Strategy focus. Why were Big John King and his family in New York City in 1783? As you read, summarize the events that led them away from their old home.
New York City, 1783. For a long while, I had been pushing my way through crowded city streets. Now, breathless, I stood at the doorway to Papa's small woodworking shop. Outside, the city's horses and wagons rattled and clanked their way through the morning. But inside the shop, everything was quiet. It seemed wrong to interrupt Papa when he was working so hard. He stood at his workbench, his powerful back bent over a wide sheet of paper. It was covered with precise drawings and the rows of figures he was checking. Around him were the tools of his trade, saws, chisels, and planes. Papa must be the best woodworker in the world, I figured. Finally, he noticed me standing there and turned my way. Then he gasped. "What have you done to yourself, boy?" he exclaimed. I looked down at my torn trousers. Mud was caked down the side of my leg, and a raw scrape reddened one elbow. "I was bringing your hinges and nails back from the blacksmith when I turned up Mott Street. There were crowds of people, horses, and everything, just tearing down the road toward the waterfront. I couldn't get through, so I just tried to move out of the way. But I ran square into two big, burly fellows and almost got trampled," I said. "But I'm okay, Papa, and here are your hinges." I produced a small sack and handed it over to him. "Thank you, son." He took the hinges and eyed me thoughtfully. "What were all those people up to, running madhouse like that?" he asked. I shrugged. "I don't know, Papa. They're just crazy city folks, I guess." Papa was not a man who laughed much, but he chuckled at that. Lots of things seemed crazy here in New York since the revolution had ended 2 years before. "I guess you were brave out there," Papa said, regarding my dirty clothes and skin. His praise must have made me bold. "Papa," I asked, "how long have we been in New York?" Always careful with numbers, Papa replied, "Today is April 18th, 1783. So it's been 14 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. Why?" "Because I miss Virginia," I said, rubbing the toe of my shoe in the sawdust on the floor. "I miss the countryside and the open land. I miss the people. And I hate city life. It's crazy and loud, and you get the feeling no one would care if you up and left at a moment's notice." Papa reminded me that I should be thankful just to be alive. Papa said it, and he meant it. But I knew he didn't like living in New York any more than I did. Still, it was just about the only place we could live right now. You see, We had been enslaved back before the war, down in Virginia. Since 1775, though, everything had changed for us. Just like everything in America changed, I guess. That was the year the Revolution began. At that time, Lord Dunmore was Virginia's royal governor. Papa thought he was the greatest man that ever lived. When the fighting started, Lord Dunmore made a pledge. He promised that he would free every slave who fought for the British. Most of Virginia by that time had gone over to the Patriot side, but Lord Dunmore remained loyal to King George. Papa had jumped at the chance for freedom. Nothing was worth more to him than liberty. So Papa took Lord Dunmore up on his pledge. One night, Papa was a slave. The next morning, he was free, a soldier fighting for the king under Lord Dunmore. Papa saw his share of battles, too. He even fought for the British at Yorktown when the British were defeated. Papa was there when the Patriots defeated Lord Dunmore at Great Bridge near Norfolk. When Lord Dunmore was forced out of Virginia in defeat and set sail for Britain, Papa stayed on and continued to fight for the Loyalists. Afterward, he gathered up our family and fled. It was a terrible time. We hid when we had to, which was most of the time, and we traveled when we could, always heading north. Papa knew that our best chance for freedom was to reach New York, where the British could still help us. A strong British presence still remained in New York. The British retained some amount of authority, and we knew that only they could ensure our freedom. Already we had heard stories of slave owners traveling north and reclaiming their former slaves. It was said they would even kidnap blacks who were unknown to them, dragging them back south, where they were sold into slavery. We lost many things on the way, but one thing we held on to for dear life, the paper stating that we were free. In New York, Papa said that paper would be our ticket to Canada and freedom for good. That was why we were in New York. But even here, the long arm of the slaveholder often threatened to snatch our freedom away. After speaking my mind to my father, I wiped the mud off my trousers and washed my scraped arm. Then I helped my father in the shop until supper time. When we walked home together, the streets were not as crowded. Mama greeted us at the door. She looked frightened. 2 slave catchers raided our building today, she said. They took one family away. I showed them your paper, John, stating you're a free man. One of them looked at it and spat. He was so mad. Then he threw the paper to the floor, and they both stormed out, Mama said. Papa looked sick when he heard all this. The paper granting us our freedom was powerful enough to give us a new life. But slave catchers didn't always heed such legal niceties. It was high time for us to get out of New York and up to Canada, Papa said. Just after supper, someone knocked on the door. Papa picked up a chair and told Mama, "Better open it." But it wasn't slave catchers. A small, nervous man stood there and introduced himself to Papa as Hector Jones. After a wary glance down the hall, he spoke. "Are you the one they call Big John?" "What if I am?" Papa responded cautiously. "Please, I need your help," Mr. Jones said. "Can we talk inside and alone?" Papa and the stranger disappeared into the back room. I heard muffled voices behind the closed door. Papa sounded calm when he spoke, at least at first. But the stranger spoke rapidly in an agitated voice. He seemed to be trying to convince Papa of something. Then I heard the stranger's raised voice, edged with fear. "But I fought for the Patriots, Big John, and you're my last hope." Mama heard him too, and she looked alarmed. A few minutes later, Papa escorted Mr. Jones to the door. After he had left, Mama rushed to Papa. "John, what did that man want?" she said. "He asked for help. He needs papers to leave, same as us. He heard from others that I can read." Papa paused for a moment, then added, "and write." Mama slowly realized what the man wanted from Papa. He wanted Papa to forge papers for him, saying that he had fought for the British. The stranger knew that Papa could read and write, and that his hand was as steady as stone. Perhaps he also knew that Papa had his own papers, declaring his rights as a free man. I hope you didn't say yes, John. We can't get mixed up in a thing like that. The man was a patriot. It's too late. If I don't help the man, he stands no chance. He would be back in chains by week's end. Papa spent much of the night working silently. He woke up before sunrise. We walked together with Hector Jones to General Birch's headquarters. It was General Birch's job to screen travelers before they left the city. People spoke well of the general, but all of us feared the great power he held over our destiny. After waiting in line for much of the day, it was time to approach General Birch. In a big tent, a man in a fancy uniform sat behind a table. 2 soldiers stood straight as pine trees behind him. "Papers," the general said, putting out his hand. The general scanned the papers, then looked up and asked Papa with whom he had served. When Papa told him Lord Dunmore, the man smiled. Then he asked Papa his name and quickly filled in some blanks on a printed certificate, which he handed to Papa. Papa clutched the certificate as if it was a fistful of gold. Then the general turned to our companion. "Your papers?" he asked. Hector Jones handed them over as Papa, Mama, and I stepped aside. I held my breath, fearful of the questions to come. "This is signed by Colonel Ty. What was your connection to him?" the general asked Jones, clearly impressed. Colonel Ty had been the most famous Loyalist fighter of all. One of Lord Dunmore's first soldiers, he was a runaway slave who ended up leading the Black Brigade in New York and New Jersey. His 800 men, both black and white, spent 3 years fighting and defeating Patriot troops and slaveholders. They knew the land well and were renowned both for their surprise attacks on the Patriots and for their ability to steal supplies. Colonel Ty's Black Brigade was prized by the British and feared by the Patriots. Many left their homes and engaged in other skirmishes or made their way to safer territory. I fought with the colonel till he got killed in '80. The general eyed Jones carefully, then looked back at the papers. "What happened to Colonel Ty?" the general asked. Mr. Jones paused and took a breath, then said that a musket ball had struck him in the heart. The general raised an eyebrow and said that he had heard the colonel took a ball in the wrist and had died of infection. I felt the blood drain from my face. I was sure the general knew the papers were false. My father lowered his eyes. Slowly, the general turned his gaze back on the papers, then with great care signed them. "Your boat leaves tomorrow from the South Street dock. Canada will welcome you, I'm sure." Birchtown, 1784. The rest of the day passed in a hurry. Hector Jones helped us pack everything we could carry, and then we all made our way to the docks 2 hours before dawn. We sailed for Canada in the morning, taking 10 days to reach Nova Scotia. Here, my parents and a few hundred others planned to build a town from scratch. Because many in our community were farmers or tradesmen back in America, we're well equipped to build the town. Plenty of people can cultivate the land and build homes and roads. We've named our new home Birchtown. We don't want to forget the man who made sure that more than 3,000 black loyalists and at least one black patriot finally tasted freedom.
All right, so there we learn a little bit about African American history and how many of them had to escape to Canada. So Canada, our neighbor, has been a good neighbor, and they've done some good things, like especially letting the Loyalists up, and more importantly, letting free African Americans up into Canada. All right, and freedom. We'll see you later. Bye.